This all came to be the Market Air Quality Campaign, which is the group putting this together, about 4 or 5 months ago. It's only been 3 months, wow. Several of the residents were having some difficulties with respiratory problems and things like that, and it was unusual. You know, we've all lived in this area for a long time and know the neighborhood well, and we were trying to figure out what was happening to us. So we started putting 2 and 2 together, got to know Duff Badgley, who's here with us tonight. Hey, Duff. Who had been working on something called biomass. And biomass is a newer green type of energy production that you'll be hearing a little bit more about, that we have a lot of questions about. There's things that we're not being told that we need to learn about. So we asked questions. We had a meeting here. Mike Smith, right over here, who's the president of the Market Air Quality Campaign that we formed, said, you know, let's see what we can find out, talk to residents, talk to people in the market, talk to vendors, and that's why everybody's here tonight to learn more. We invited Dr. Bill Sammons. He's coming out from Boston, Massachusetts, all the way out just to see us, which is really great. He's the national leading expert on biomass and all the particulars of how it works. He's a pediatrician who's worked with vulnerable populations, children, adults as well as families, and started learning about this and saying, wait a second, this isn't adding up. These figures don't work. What's coming out of this? What are we producing when we're trying to do something we call green, and these companies change over and turn green with biomass production? What does that involve? Well, right here in the market, we're next to the Seattle Steam Company. The smokestacks right over here with the big whales on the side of the building. Yeah, we want to know what's coming out of the smokestacks because they've recently converted. And those are the questions that we started asking. So that's just a little overview. Mike, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I've lived here for 25 years, and so I watched people in my building getting an unusual spike in their respiratory issues, and then I started talking to people around the market and discovered that it's all over. People are complaining. I have, you know, like the least complaints, but I hadn't had a cold in memory, and since the first of the year I've had 2. And I just spoke with someone else who had a similar experience. It just, the more I talk to people, the more obvious this is becoming. But the thing that I'm learning from Bill is that this is probably the least of our concerns. The whole nanoparticle issue is even worse, and that's the sort of thing I believe, he'll clarify, that's the sort of thing that you will experience often later on. And anyway, my real job here is to try to figure out ways of pushing this forward. And one of the things we're doing is we're collecting signatures for a call for a moratorium. And so be sure and either sign one now or take one home and collect some signatures yourself. We've got to get as many names on this as quickly as we can. We've got a very short window to try to stop this before it is relicensed for 5 years. And there is an opportunity to maybe stop it at this point. If we don't, however, if we don't stop it at this point, we're not going to quit. We've got, well, you know, our lives and the market itself. This is really a new Save the Market campaign, because the whole market stands at risk of the public finding out that, oh, the air here is poison. Maybe I won't go there. And I know a lot of businesses can't stand to lose, 2% of their customers. This could really eat into that, and it could be, a cascading effect. So we're always looking for people to come on board and help in whatever way we can. We've got a wonderful website set up by Kevin Smith, and you have an opportunity to sign the petition through that, and to donate money, and to learn more, and sign up to get emails. So if you're not already on our mailing list, you'll be sure and get notified of everything that's going on. So I think that's about all I have to say. So I'll turn it back to Revel.
Thanks, Mike. And Dr. Sammons is going to tell us a little bit about himself and then give you the straight dirt on what's been going on. Biomass.
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. Switch a little awkward. I'm not going to tell you much about myself. The message is more important than the messenger. I will tell you that we have now stopped 24 or 25 of these things across the country. They're going to tell you this is a done deal. I've been 24 or 25 places where we got told it was a done deal. It's now an over deal. So you can stop this. It is important to stop them because they are a significant health risk. And what I'm going to try and explain tonight is what's behind the health risk, the fact that the current regulations are not protective because they don't actually address the substances in the air emissions that are the biggest health risk to you or me or anybody walking through the market, and they're especially a health risk to children. It's being sold as so-called clean and green power. I'll be happy to answer anybody's questions about that, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because basically what happened was when this whole idea got started 15, 20 years ago about burning biomass to produce power, there were a number of suppositions made. One was it's carbon neutral in a short period of time, so it would help the environment. Well, one of the things we're really dependent on right now is every tree doing as much as every tree possibly can do to pull CO2 out of the air. If you cut them down and burn them, they don't work very well to pull CO2 out of the air. And in fact, when you burn wood, for every unit of power you produce about 30–40% more CO2 than if you burn coal, and a magnitude greater more CO2 than if you burn natural gas. And that's one of the real enigmas of this situation, is they have natural gas units in this plant. And basically they're going to propose to replace them. Well, it doesn't make any sense because from an environmental point of view, it's significantly dirtier to burn wood, and I'm going to show you the data behind that. It's a bigger health risk. It's more costly. The Energy Information Administration, which is part of the Department of Energy, just released a study a couple of weeks ago. I'll be happy to send it to anybody, in which they went and looked at what's the real total cost of producing different kinds of power. Biomass combustion turned out to be the most expensive form of power production, even greater than nuclear power. It's very expensive power to produce. So from an economic point of view, especially in a city and a state like most of the rest of the country, where you're looking at huge budget cuts, why are they investing in something which is going to be more expensive power? So part of why I do this on my own nickel. Peabody Coal or anybody else doesn't pay anything of this stuff. The point here is that the more you look at this, the less sense it makes. And they're in an advantageous position right now, and they can still use natural gas to produce the steam heat. They haven't blown off all those units. They go right back to doing it. And they can operate it much more cheaply and much cleaner than they can ever burning wood. There's nothing they can do to make burning wood come even close from an economic point of view or from an emissions point of view to burning wood. It can't be done. End of story there, okay? The other thing they're going to tell you is that this is all a matter of controversy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when they do their little dog and pony show, I want you to watch, A, how many references they give you for what they say. Usually they're about 0. Or the ones they give you, especially when they want to talk about carbon accounting, are all published before 2009. And the reason they're all published before 2009 was that the rules have changed. And the reason the rules have changed is not because of some scientific chicanery or anything else. It's the person who wrote the original policy, 1996, a man named Stephen Hamburg, working for the IPCC, which is part of the UN, developed this very complex calculation system about carbon accounting. However, the world sort of didn't follow all of his if, ands, or buts, and we ended up with this very stilted system. And 2 years ago, October of 2009, it's October 23 of Science magazine, I'll be happy to send it to anybody. Take down the email, anything you want, I'll send it to you. Basically, Hamburg, who wrote this policy, said it's wrong, it's a mistake. However, so far, and I've seen a lot of documents out of DNR in this state, and Duff and I have had some interesting talks with Craig Partridge and Rachel Jameson down there. They're clinging to the old stuff. They're trying to make everybody believe that the old way of accounting for carbon is accurate, and it's not. The basic problem is that if you burn wood for it to be carbon neutral, you're talking about a time lapse of roughly 100 years, and that assumes that you're going to be able to regrow all of the trees, and you're going to keep them up there for the 100 years it takes to reaccumulate the carbon. Now, if you go look at whatever the discussions are, business perspective, et cetera, for Seattle Steam, I don't think you're going to find very much about how they're going to be responsible for regrowing the trees and making sure this is really carbon neutral. So the whole thing is a big sham game, right? So it won't work. I'm going to show you lots of the reasons why it won't work. I'm going to try and run through the segments relatively quickly. If you have questions, it sort of stacks on itself. So I don't mind you raising your hand and asking the question. I may very legitimately say to you, I'm going to get to that in about 3 minutes, so bear with me. Or if it's something that needs to be clarified, I'm going to clarify it. Okay? The big moving piece of this at the moment is money. Okay? It's much more true of most of the plants across the country, of which there are about 250 proposed now, are generating electricity. They're not generating heat. But just to give you an idea, this is not just a parochial Seattle problem. There's about 250 plants. Conservatively, at the moment, if the current tax structures stay in place, you and I, as taxpayers, are going to be on the hook for about $12 billion, that's a B, that's not a misspelling, $12 billion over the next 3 to 5 years to basically underwrite 30% of the construction costs of these plants. Now, that's not the only thing you're going to be paying for, by the way, because most of these plants are going to be able to claim so-called renewable energy credits, which is a nice idea if you're really producing clean, green energy. Burning wood is not clean, green energy, and again, I'm going to show you the data in a second. If it's wind or solar, whatever, you can argue that we should or shouldn't have tax credits to support that. But if you look at these plants, and they're going to be about 50 gigawatts of electricity, it's a lot of juice across the country, it's going to roughly mean, at the most conservative level, another $2 billion a year. And basically, you're going to pay that because it's going to come through your ratepayer bill. Okay? All right. And then, if the current policies stay in place, and EPA keeps putting this off and putting this off and putting this off, is sooner or later, we're going to have some kind of accounting for carbon, and it's going to cost something. Right now, these plants, although they produce more CO2 than burning coal per unit of power, get to claim 0 carbon emissions. There's a huge loophole in the rules. But that's also going to mean money that they should be paying into the system, okay? They should be having to account for that, and you're eventually going to have to pay for it. So when I tell you this is really expensive power, it's really expensive power. Now, I don't know what it's costing them to run the biomass end of this thing, because they're not giving us the numbers. But right now, you can bet that it's a couple of times more expensive than using natural gas if you just take numbers from across the country. As I said, I'll send you the EIA chart. You can just look at the chart. It's got all the numbers there. Clearly shows you that biomass is much more expensive. And it's going to stay more expensive. So what do you get for the money? Well, you get dirty power. You get expensive power. You get a financial debacle because we're talking $20 billion over the next 5 years to pay for something you're not going to really get. You get added health risks, and you get a lot of added health costs. Now, again, it's not my opinion or belief. I'm going to show you briefly some things that have come out from the American Heart Association, the American Lung Association, the Cancer Society, the Institute of Medicine at the National Academy of Sciences. These people have no bias in the power industry. They're just sitting there saying, what are the risks and what are the costs? And the universal opinion is, this is very risky, very costly power generation. We're not going to talk about all these things, but just to give you a little better idea of what's coming out of that smokestack, all of these things we could spend an hour on. NOx, ozone, etc., heavy metals, the list goes on and on, volatile organic chemicals. I'm going to specifically pick out two. And the reason I'm going to pick out dioxin and particulates is that they happen to be relatively unique in that the important thing to remember here is that there's no safe threshold of exposure for these things. So when you look at even pollutants like lead, if this is health risk on the y-axis, the x-axis is the amount you get exposed to, what happens is you get increasing exposure and you get slightly increasing risk, and all of a sudden you get to a threshold and it goes way up real fast. With these two chemicals, groups, because they're a group, each one, it's a linear dose response curve. It's a 45-degree angle. Every increment of increase gets an immediate increase of risk. And again, it's not my belief, it's not controversial, it has been affirmed over and over and over again in the last 5 years. Okay? Particulate matter and dioxin. I'm going to go through it here. I'll send you the whole slideshow. You can look at the thing ad nauseum. As we get into this, again, there are URLs for everything. All you got to do is click on it. If you're web connected, it'll take you to the paper. If you want to read some of the ones I marked up, I'll send them to you marked up. Most of this stuff, you don't need to be a physician. You don't need a lot of statistics or anything to look at. The conclusions are just really straightforward and apparent. It's a big risk. And part of the problem here is to not defend the regulators, but at least to let you understand, is that especially a lot of the medical science, as well as a lot of the climate science, is 2, 3, 5 years old. Now, that doesn't absolve the city council or anybody else from making the correct decision just because the regulations haven't caught up with the data, but the data is what it is, and you don't have to have anything more than probably high school science, and maybe not even that, to understand what's going on here and why this is such a problem. But right now, the regulations are not protective because there is no regulation to set a safe level of dioxin. And in terms of particulates, there are multiple categories of particulates, but the ones we're really concerned about are really, really small ones called nanos and UFPs, ultrafine particles. There is no regulation on that. Doesn't exist. So they're going to come out of the smokestack, and they're there, and I'm going to show you what the health effects of these things are. Let's just briefly talk about dioxin. Okay. Everybody's, at least in this room, most everybody's aware, because we're old enough to remember Agent Orange. Okay? And everybody, it's basically a dioxin-related chemical. Dioxin is actually a whole family of chemicals. There are probably 22 which have major cancer-causing effects. There's a total group that's about 200, but we're just going to call it dioxin. All right? Cancer turns out to be the least of the problems with this chemical. Okay? There's been an ongoing discussion at EPA for more than a decade of whether there really is any safe threshold exposure. I was on a big conference call the other month, and the obvious answer is there is no safe threshold of exposure. If you get exposed, you're going to be at risk. Okay? The current proposed level of exposure for somebody my size is that number, and that number of zeros is accurate. So there are a lot of zeros before you get to the 1. It's almost nothing, and that's what they think the risk is. And in this phone call, more than 100 people are on the phone call, and most of the people said, we don't buy it. We think it's probably lower. Basically, there is no safe threshold. Well, why is it a problem? Well, clearly everybody's heard about the cancer problems. But it turns out that the Institute of Medicine and the National Academy of Sciences put out this paper in 2008. Basically, they said there's more risk from insulin-dependent diabetes, nerve and heart disease, immunodeficiency problems, and probably spina bifida and other central nervous system congenital abnormalities in kids. So cancer is a big problem. As far as I know at this point, dioxin as a family, and specifically one particular cogener of dioxin, is the most carcinogenic chemical they've ever tested. But the cancer isn't the biggest risk. This stuff is just plain dangerous, all right? And we don't have a way to control it. There is no technology to get rid of it. It's going to be there, okay? In this plant, they're going to burn urban waste wood. Now that means there's going to be construction demolition in it, which means you're going to have treated wood. When you have, you can get dioxin from simply going out, chopping down these trees we can see here on the horizon and burning them, because they do have chlorine in them. They will produce dioxin. When you have CND, the level of dioxin is going to go way, way up. They are going to have one person, according to what we've seen so far, trying to segregate the wood. It's been shown over and over again in repetitive studies, I can send you those references, that you cannot efficiently visually sort the wood and keep the contaminated wood out. It's a nice idea. I'm glad they're making the effort, but it's not going to work, okay? So just to review, again, the cancer potency is more than 600 other chemicals. The systemic effects greater than the cancer effects, okay? Half-life in your body is at least 7 years, so it's not like you can take it in and excrete it. You know, drinking more beer or whatever is going to help you get rid of it. Be a nice idea. It's not going to work. The big thing here is, as with particulates, kids who get exposed to this over longer periods of time are much more at risk than the adults. Dioxin is a so-called lipophilic chemical, and they've already done this multiple times over. This is actually an EPA document. To get to an EPA document, you gotta have a lot of studies that say the same thing. Current kids who are breastfed have, when they measure tissue levels of dioxin, it's significantly above the tissue level that anybody thinks is safe. Now, what the long-term health effects of that are, nobody knows yet, but it just shows we're already exposed to this. Now, when you burn natural gas, to the best of my knowledge, you don't get any dioxin. They're already burning natural gas in this plant. Okay, they got to produce steam for these buildings. All right, fine. Why not continue to use a cleaner source of fuel that's cheaper, that doesn't produce dioxin? Now, dioxin isn't bad enough. So let's go to the particulates, because this, I think, is the real joker in the pile. Okay? This is a chart which compares Boardman, which is a big coal plant down in Portland. I use that because I was able to double check the numbers. I know they're absolutely accurate. This is a big natural gas plant, 440 megawatt natural gas plant. These are 3 biomass plants. These are numbers from their own company documents. There was every pollution control turned on. So everything's operating as well as it can operate. I can talk half the night about CO2. I'm not going to do much with CO2 tonight, but just look at these numbers. We've repeated these on multiple different plants. The numbers are relatively all the same. About 9,000 tons of carbon per year per megawatt of power out of coal. Natural gas, which they're already burning, 1/3. Way down. Now, let's compare burning wood and burning CND. 12,000, 11,000, 12,000. In comparison to coal, 39% more. Comparison to natural gas, 300% more CO2. These numbers have been repeated over and over again. So they already have a very clean source of power there, but they're going to replace it with something which is more CO2. Relatively more NOx, but I'm not going to talk about NOx tonight. Ozone, it's a problem. I'm not trying to say it's not a problem. Here's where we get into real difficulty. Particulate matter. 186% more than coal. 1,300% more. 13 times natural gas. And they're telling you this plant is clean and it's going to help the environment. Okay? So, again, we've looked at a lot of these numbers. This plant is a little bit cleaner because it was burning CND. It's in Massachusetts, and because it's burning CND, it gets the most expensive controls put on it. So they could reduce the particulates more, but burning biomass always produces more particulates, especially small level particulates, than burning coal or natural gas. We'll always do it no matter what the pollution control is. Yep. Construction, demolition, so it's basically turns out to be fiberboard and lots of treated kind of wood. Yep. Yep. Well, right, but again, I kept this up, A, to show you that the carbon number stays roughly the same. And this is just interesting in that because they know they're going to have treated wood, even though they try and separate it out for this plant, in Massachusetts, they have to put on the most efficient controls they can put on, which they don't for the wood plants, as you can see from these numbers, okay? But the important piece here is even if you put on the most efficient controls we've got, you're not going to get rid of the increase in particulates, okay? Now, they're going to come around and they're going to tell you that they're putting on either a baghouse or an electrostatic precipitator, or maybe in both. I doubt both, but they could do both. And they're going to tell you they're getting rid of 98 or 99% of the particulates. The first question you want to ask is by mass or by number? It's by mass, okay? And by mass doesn't count in this game because the ones that are important are very, very small. They're only about 1 to 2% of what's going to get emitted, but they're the killers. The big, heavy particles are not the ones that are going to make you or your kids or your customers sick. So basically, there's PM10, which is a big particle about 1/10 the diameter of a hair. This is what they've been measuring all along because they thought that was the problem. Turns out it's not. 2.5 is where most of the debate's been, and it has cardiovascular, pulmonary effects, but it's nowhere near as dangerous as these babies. And these are the things that at this point are just going to come out. And so you're going to get a big, heavy dose of these because the current technology is not very efficient at getting rid of them. And we don't have the technology because in this society, basically, we don't have a regulation, so nobody's forced to do the R&D. Nobody has to buy the equipment, so we don't have it. I don't know whether they could develop it or not. I suspect they probably could. But right now, it's a big problem. It's not only from the biomass plant, but from the truck engines and everything else. I'm going to show you that we're exposed right now to levels that the Heart Association, the Lung Association, everybody thinks are dangerous. The proponents of this plant are going to tell you, well, it's only a little bit more. Aha, it's true, it's only a little bit more, but don't forget, this is a linear dose response curve. There is no safe threshold. Every bit that you add adds health risk. In our society now, is that going to make you sick? But it's money, and it's a lot of money. The American Lung Association has estimated that just for pulmonary disease, not heart disease, not anything else, just for pulmonary disease alone, the current level of legally safe permitted exposure to particulates cost $22 billion a year. That's just particulate-related lung disease. So it's a big number. It's a lot of money. Okay? Another way to put it is, and again, this is not my opinion, this is actually now an EPA document, so it's crossed a major threshold. There is no discernible threshold below which concentrations propose no health risk. So as soon as you have exposure, you have health risk. The more exposure you get, the more the health risk. Now, one of the things that is questioned is, well, does a little matter? I think I included that slide. First thing is, I have 2 other articles I'll be happy to send you. They're inked up. They're red and yellow and blue, and the code's on the thing. You can just look at them. You don't need to be a physician. What got me really interested in this was, I think I was actually flying out here to meet with Duff about a year and a half ago. I started plowing through this about 150-page article in circulation, which is the American Heart Association journal. It was about particulates, about which I have to say I didn't know much. And the more I read, the scarier the whole plane ride got, because these things interfere with every bioregulatory system in the body. The small ones, not only do you breathe them in and they get to your lung, they penetrate and they get into your blood and they go everywhere. They interfere with blood pressure regulation. They interfere with blood clotting. They accelerate the amount of plaque you put down in your arteries. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. They go everywhere. So they're really a risk. But then a year ago, they put out another review article, and one of the stunning things is here, the evidence has grown and been strengthened substantially since publication of the first scientific statement that it's worse than we thought. So the 2005 article was pretty damn scary. Now they're saying we underestimated it. So even though we're already exposed to a lot, you can't afford to be exposed to more. And yes, we have some difficult societal decisions because we probably need to decrease the level that we are exposed to, okay? Another way to look at it is at a population base. And this is just in relation to 2.5, which is dangerous but not the most dangerous, is the Heart Association has come out and said that although we can't sort of say for one individual how risky it is, it's like smoking. Some people can smoke 2 packs a day for 50 years and never get lung cancer. But most of us will get lung cancer and die. So for any individual, we can't say what it is. But as a public health burden, the ubiquitous exposure to 2.5, the current supposed legal safe levels, contributes to the early mortality, not just morbidity, mortality, tens of thousands of people every year. That's the Heart Association. They're not a power producer. They don't have any vested interest in this. They're just telling you this is really risky stuff, okay? The permits aren't protective because they don't address any levels for nanos, UFPs, or dioxin. It's not there. To show you why a little difference is important, the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee is an in-house advisory committee for the EPA. The level that they've been talking about for 2.5 for daily exposure is 15 micrograms per meter cube. This debate has been going on for more than 12 years. In 2006, they came out and said, we don't think it's sufficient. We're still having the debate, but their in-house advisory group told them it's not sufficient. And the reason why I put this up is not just because of that, but because what they actually recommended was that the level should be dropped to at least 13. So even 15 to 13 is a big, big difference in terms of health effects. So when the proponents of the plant sit there and tell you, well, it's going to raise it a little bit, but not too much, doesn't work. You can't afford to raise it at all. The current levels aren't safe. And 1 microgram is going to be significant. And the people who are going to be right around here are going to usually, depending on wind currents and lots of other stuff, going to have heavier exposure. Again, quoting from the AHA, a reasonable argument can now be made that the real effects of particulates are likely to be stronger than previously stated. So if you just go to PubMed or whatever, and you type in ultrafines, since 2005, you literally get thousands of articles. This is a big, booming area of concern. What you want to remember is it's not mass that counts, it's the number. Trillions of ultrafines weigh almost nothing. So they can take out 98% of the mass. They're not going to get what needs to be gotten. Now, why are they different? Again, I want you to understand the physiology of this, okay? So when they look at people who are exposed to this, and they're breathing in high particulate levels, like people who live along I-5, right near I-5, there's a lot of particulate exposure. And they look at their lung biopsies, and what they see is that 1 in 1,000 has a coarse particle, or PM10. But when you look at the smaller particles, there are hundreds there. And again, the risk is not only do they sit there, but they get through. Now, there's one other hooker, which again, I'm not going to talk very much about, but it's important in terms of your health, is that 2,5, the next group down, but especially the real small ones, tend to bind up to heavy metal ions. Cadmium, mercury, other things which don't do you much good, and they drag the heavy metal ion in when they get through. So it's kind of a double dose of bad news. Just to give you a little further flavor of this, there's now data that shows that an increase of 10 micrograms, which you typically get in an air inversion. So forget about the biomass plant wasn't there. You get a big air inversion here. This, the local pollution, probably will raise it 10. You can see what the numbers are. They're a huge effect. And again, children, by far and away, have bigger effects. I'm going to show you some data on that in a second. The other thing you want to watch is if they have the temerity to talk to you about medical effects, look at the publication date. I have been 22, 24 different states on this little gallivanting tour in the last 2 years. And some places have tried to put up medical data. And what they did was they cited papers that were published in the 90s and the early 2000s. And the reason they did that was that those papers looked at the immediate effects of increased particulates right when they tell you, oh, it's a horrible air day, don't go outside. It's a good idea, don't go outside, it's bad news. Okay? The problem is that once you get exposed, the depressive effects, and every one of us, no matter how healthy you are, you could be running marathons. If you get in a high particulate exposure, we could sit here and measure your lung function and your heart function, and it will go down, markedly down. And the effect lasts for about 5 days. So what happened was, the second day or the third day, when they tell you, the air's better, and you can go out, start mowing your lawn, exercising again, well, the air's better, but the point is your heart and your lungs haven't recovered. So what they did is in more recent studies, sort of 2004, 2005 on, they started to look, and like 40% of the heart attacks were occurring on day 4, 5, 6, 7, because people still had depressed function, but they were going out and exercising. So if somebody shows you data, and it's related to cardiopulmonary function about particulates, and it's published before 2005, it's probably not valid. There's also a year effect. Again, I'll send you all this stuff, okay? All right. So, just to review some of the risk statements, most of this is from the American Heart Association because they've been most interested in it, okay? Again, it's a linear curve, it's monotonic. As you go up, the risk goes up. 15 micrograms is not safe. At the level we currently have in the current environment, okay, reduces life expectancy in the population by months to years. Current legally national ambient air quality standards, safe levels, this is what the Heart Association thinks. So do you want to add any more of this stuff to your air, even if it's a little bit? I don't think so, okay? Long-term exposure definitely increases the risk. Kids. I spent a lot of my life taking care of very sick newborns. One of the things we still don't understand very much about is what induces premature delivery. Not only is that a heartbreaking situation, but believe me, it's a very costly situation to deal with in the system. But one of the things that's now been shown very conclusively in the last 2 or 3 years is no question that exposure to small level particulates is definitely one of the factors that can induce premature labor. Okay? Also, people who have pregnancies, when they're exposed to high levels for long periods of time, their low birth weight, et cetera, they're compounding factors in this. One of the most interesting studies was done in the California Child Health Study. And I'm just going to simplify this, but they took 2 very big groups of high school athletes. High school athletics in California tend to be pretty competitive. These kids are in good shape. And essentially what they did was they divided them into kids who were in indoor sports and kids who were in outdoor sports. 4 years later, they looked at many things, but the thing that really stands out is the incidence of new asthma cases. Statistically, clearly related to the particulate exposure. 300% greater in the kids in outdoor sports. New cases. It wasn't kids who got sicker. 40 years ago, 40 plus years ago when I was going to medical school, they told us you get exposed to this stuff, you get sicker. Not only do you get sicker, but if you're a kid, you're actually going to have more likelihood of acquiring disease, okay? Here's another real shaker. They measured lung function, different study. The kids who grow up in high particulate exposure levels have a permanent loss of about 20% of lung function. They're more likely to develop emphysema at an earlier age. They're more likely to develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Now, you or I could smoke 2 packs a day for 20 years and quit today. And in about 1.5 years, we can measure your lung function, and it would probably be pretty much back to normal. See, what happens with the kids is they're growing up and the tissue is developing exposed to these chemicals, and it changes the tissue. If you look at the histology, you look at the cell structure, it's actually different. That's why the lung function is different, okay? So This stuff is not real good. Okay? The Indiana Child Health Study, so you can say, well, California is a bunch of wackos and left-wing nuts. Well, Indiana, Governor Daniels will tell you, is not a bunch of left-wing nuts. And they basically came to the same conclusions. It's a totally separate study, not quite the same design, but basically came to exactly the same conclusions. Now, I was hoping when I went looking in the literature, in the industry, I would find something different. These are all industry quotes. I'll send you all the articles. But mass concentration doesn't matter. First quote. So taking out 98% of the mass doesn't make any difference. Okay? The health effects here are clearly related to particle number, not mass, not weight. There's some complicated chemistry in here. I'll explain to anybody if you want to know it. But here's the kicker, okay? Very small particles. So this is less than 1/10 of a micrometer, okay? We can't remove them. This is the industry saying we can't remove them. So they're going to tell you they're doing the best, they're doing exactly what's required, and that's the truth. They're going to meet every legal requirement. The problem for you people who are going to live around this thing, and the people who come visit, et cetera, is it's not going to protect them from getting exposed to something that's a very significant health risk. So, in Seattle in general, because there's a bigger issue here in this state about power, this is heat. There are a number of other proposals in this state to burn wood to generate electrical power. It is not carbon neutral, despite what the governor says and despite what Commissioner Goldmark says. It produces more toxic pollutants than burning coal per unit of power produced. And that's what you want to look at. When they tell you what the numbers are, and you're going to see a little chart that's going to come out from Seattle Steam, and they're going to sit there and show you your fireplace has this gargantuan number, da-da-da-da. And what they're going to do is per million BTUs, per heat content. It's about what the power output is. So what you want to look at is the fourth bar on that little graph, which is what they're saying the biomass unit is going to put out for particulates, and the seventh one on that graph, which is what they put out for natural gas. And you're going to see that I believe the number on the biomass was something like 0.03 tons or pounds per million BTUs. And on natural gas, which is what they have and what they're replacing, the number is 0.0075. Okay? So it's a huge factor difference. And the question is why? Is it more economical? No. Is it better for the environment? No. Is it going to mean more health risk, more health costs? Yes. Is it cheaper to run? No. Does it cost more money to put the units in for the amount of power you get out? Yes. The EIA, again, has come out and said this is the most expensive form of power generation we have. So there are lots of reasons to say stick with what you got, okay? And in general, for the state, you are very, very fortunate, okay? You got a bunch of big dams sitting over on the Columbia. Now, dams have their own problems, et cetera, but a lot of people working on trying to make that as good as they can for the fish and everything else, okay? Turns out, especially in relation to proposals that are going to be in this state to burn more biomass for electricity, it's probably going to cost, in real terms, 18 or 19 cents kilowatt hour to get to you. When you factor in all the tax subsidies and everything else, it's very expensive. The wholesale contracts for Chelan, Douglas County, et cetera, they're all up at the end of this year, okay? The transmission lines are already in place, so you don't have to put in new transmission lines. They're currently selling the power over there at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and they have a huge excess. So bear in mind that you've got to deal with Seattle Steam, and bear in mind that there's a lot bigger problem, especially down here on the Olympic Peninsula and down in Longview, with some major league, huge plants that people are going to make a lot of money because you're going to pay for it, you're going to underwrite it, you're going to subsidize it with your tax dollars, want to put these plants up, and they're going to tell you this is the green, safe way to provide electrical power. And it's big sham. It's a very costly sham, but beware. But right here, you've got a system in place where they could just stay with what they had, and everybody would be better off, economically, power-wise, health-wise, environment. So, yep. I have not yet had a chance to talk with these individuals specifically, so I think whatever time they're going to meet with you next or whatever, that's an important question to ask them. And make sure you get an answer that you can understand. And if they tell you it's safer by health reasons, you ask them for the references. If they tell you it's more economical, you ask them to give you the breakdown on that. Because I'll send you the EIA stuff and lots of other things would tell you it's just not true. Okay? I don't know. The DNR in this state continues to hold to antiquated rules, some very funny accounting systems, which are trying to say that burning biomass is carbon neutral and it's relatively clean. When you go through the papers, and I've gone through them all, they all have notes on them, they all explain what the problems are, send them to you, just ask, I'll send them. You'll see that they're not quite playing straight math. So it's a good question to ask them, and I'd be interested to see whether they come up with an answer, because so far, going around the country, nobody has yet been able to tell me, other than making money, because you can get renewable energy credits, especially generating electricity, et cetera. I don't know why they think they're going to do this. Whether they're going to expand this plant, go in some different direction, whether they're going to start making electricity out of it so they get renewable energy credits, whether they're going to go to other kinds of fuel production, I'm not sure, but my suspicion is something else is going to try to develop out of this, which will be more profitable. You have a question? The question is, are they trying to capitalize on green subsidies? I think they probably are. The question is, as the current laws are written, and I unfortunately have had to spend a lot of time in Washington talking to people about this stuff, it's not clear to me when they're only generating heat what they can tap into and what they can't, at least at a federal level. In Washington State, I'm not sure. Okay. Yep. The question is, do they have the infrastructure? And I brought up this particular piece just because you have the Seattle steam issue, but I want you to be aware of a much bigger, both state and national issue here about burning wood, especially to generate electrical power. You are very fortunate here in that you've got some major sources of very cheap electricity. And their contract structure is such that in the next year, this all got to roll over. So it doesn't apply to this specific issue of the heat going to the hospitals, because no, they'd have to make a big conversion. But you've got a very reasonably safe, very economical system in line right now. They're burning natural gas. They've got the natural gas there. It won't require a lot of truck trips coming in. The noise, the air pollution from the truck trips, which is going to be significant, especially as they start to ramp up the size of this. If they replace the other 3 natural gas burners with wood, then you're going to be dealing with a lot more truck trips. One of the things they do not have to account for in the permitting process is the pollution from the trucks. Now, that logically doesn't make any sense, but that's part of the reason why the whole process isn't protective. They're called fugitive emissions, and they don't have to account for them. And yet, we've seen some big plants across the country, 50, 100 megawatt plants, where the total truck emissions are almost as much or roughly equivalent to the plant emissions. Because when you're hauling this stuff 75 miles with diesel engines, there's a lot of particulates. But they don't have to account for that. But you're going to live with it. The health effects are going to impact you or your kids or people along these truck routes, but the permits don't make them account for it. Yep, back. You start meetings like this and you take the petitions, as Rebel said, and you go out and get a lot of people sign it. Basically, it's going to come down almost undoubtedly to political pressure and information. Because again, I think a lot of times the politicians hear this stuff and they say, well, this sounds pretty good. It's supposed to be clean, it's supposed to be green. There are a lot of federal policies in place, makes it sound good. Maybe there's some financial attractions which might benefit the city as well as Seattle Steam. But you notice the title of this thing, I've been hanging around with too many lawyers, is due diligence. They don't do the due diligence. Once you do that, this isn't controversial. Again, I'll give you every reference for anything here. There is no controversy about is it carbon neutral in a short duration of time. There is no controversy. It is not. Is it a health risk? It absolutely is. Is it expensive? Absolutely is. Yep. Well, you may have to go farther. I can give you some examples of different areas in the country where email me, I'll send you some stuff. I mean, I've been to 24, 25 states. We've stopped equivalent number, couple in some states, a lot of we're still battling. But you know, we stopped plants in Florida, we stopped plants here in Shelton. We stopped plants in Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it can be done. But it does take effort, does take people being persistent, does take people going to meetings, does ask the question and get an answer that gives you a real answer. Somebody gives you something, you go, wait a minute, that was just a lot of hot air. Say it. It's hot air. Get an answer that makes sense to you. Yep. A lot of this is, I mean, some places, who knows what's gone on to get it to the point where they're actually constructing or trying to start operating these plants. There have been clearly incidents where we've exposed political graft. I'm not saying that's happening here, but that's one thing. There are lots of places where people just don't want to look at the science. They sit there and say, well, it's going to be a few more jobs for our community, or we think it's going to be more money. So they decide that's more important. Well, you know, one political individual may decide that, but they better listen to the community. And ultimately, you know, a couple of places like Gretna, Florida, that was a done deal, absolute done deal. Well, we had 3 meetings there in a fairly short period of time. People got pretty upset. They started a recall campaign. Gone.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Duff with No Biomass Burn. We're in Seattle, and we're organizing against these biomass incinerators across the state. On August 9th, a little over a month ago, there was a public meeting with the CEO of Seattle Steam, Stan Gent, and even though the format was biased against us, we asked him all those questions. He is abundantly aware of the health effects, and he dismisses them all by saying, if we believed that, we wouldn't be doing this. So that's how he dismisses it. He's extremely arrogant and cavalier. We have, yeah, exactly. We're, at least one contract is with Cedar Grove Compost to provide the waste wood in Seattle.
This is a little unusual as opposed to most of the things you're familiar with in the Southeast, and it's basically a heat plant. So they currently have the infrastructure. Plant's been here for 100 plus years, used to burn coal, then went to natural gas, now they've got this bonanza of doing biomass, and basically it's a steam heat operation. So it's a little unusual for most of the things you're seeing. And currently they still have in place 3 natural gas burners. And why they're going to biomass is a good question. I didn't mean to interrupt. But.
At this meeting on August 9th, Stan Gent let slip their plan. This is just the foot in the door. They plan to make a major biofuel refinery from their waste wood burner. Yeah, and so they see, you probably know, it's a parallel sister issue, and right now the insanity gripping the highest levels of Washington state government and national government is to burn wood to make liquid fuels. And even though Gent did not elaborate on that, the only sense I can make out of, economically out of what they're doing now, is that they invested in the wood burners so that they can make a lot of money making biofuels down the road. Because as Bill said, nothing else plays out in an economic sense. And he hides, when you ask Stan Gent, why are you doing this, he claims it's renewable and sustainable and the carbon neutral. Big lie that we call. Yeah, I'm not the economic expert on that, but as Bill lays out, there is no economic sense in what he's doing unless they're planning something much larger with that wood burner that they have. And Stan Gent said that they're going to make biofuels out of it. They're banking that on the future. That right now, Peter Goldmark, Commissioner of Public Lands and head of DNR, got a bill passed into law this past session for a pilot project for just that. It's backed by Boeing and the Air Force and some others, big players, to burn our forests to produce jet fuel.
Believe me, we're trying. The problem here is that, especially with, I haven't been able to get a new meeting with Patty Murray's office since she's been put on the super committee. We're trying. I just went through a very detailed, many hour analysis of the documents that Senator Cantwell's chief of staff likes to quote, and pointed out to them the logical, chemical, biological flaws, which I just sent off today from the plane when I was flying out here. They basically are hiding behind saying, well, DNR has produced a couple of documents in the last year which uses pre-2009, pre-searching your article, IPCC convention, which has now been discredited by the author of that policy, to say that it's carbon neutral. Well, as long as they're going to hide behind that, then that's letting the politicians have a, have something to shield themselves. And part of the concern here is with the forestry industry depressed, there's a big jobs issue. So anything which they can sit there and say, well, it's jobs, it's obviously a high hurdle.
I'd like to answer that for the neighborhood organization. And we're only 3 months old, and we haven't had time to get to McDermott yet. We need help, and my other role as a recruiter is, will you help us? We need all hands on deck.
I can make some phone calls.
Okay.
We just learned today that Mayor McGinn has turned chief propagandist for Seattle Steam. We had a meeting at 4:30 this afternoon with City Council member Nick Licata, organized by Mike. We are methodically, under Mike's leadership, going and meeting with every City Council member. And this was our second meeting with Licata, and he had the handout, the chart that Bill referred to earlier, that is produced by the OSC, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and Environment, Jill Simmons, who sits on the permitting agency's board, pretty incestuous. And I met with her in May and presented a lot of the same information Bill is showing you tonight, and it was a dead end. She stonewalled me. She refused to acknowledge any of the impact, the health impact. And today we learned from Nick Licata that the PowerPoint show that I gave Jill in May, she fed to Seattle Steam. Seattle Steam came back with what Bill calls a package chart, completely distorting the health impacts of particulate matter in favor of Seattle Steam and away from all the information Bill's been presenting. And this is the mayor. So not only has the mayor not agreed to meet with us, he is defending aggressively Seattle Steam. We need to turn the heat up big time on McGinn, the pseudo green person, the mayor who touted his membership in Sierra Club. That's the mayor.
Well, it would and it wouldn't. I mean, I can only tell you that one of the things we've been working on, it's very frustrating as well. On the one hand, we have a lot of statements from the American Heart Association, the Lung Association. I think the Lung Association is going to participate with us. I think we finally got approval for a briefing today in DC while I was on the plane. And we've got a number of medical societies and state, local people, et cetera, to sign on to petitions, congressional things to stop this. Getting the medical world to do anything is difficult. I'm perfectly happy to go talk to anybody we get any contacts with about this, because you would think that the medical world would get more agitated about it, but unfortunately most of them are at the moment overwhelmed with some other, shall we say, business aspects of their lives, that it's difficult to get them to do much with this. Yes. Well, the question is, do they want bad press in their businesses? Yes, but I mean, part of it is now you have to get enough going here that you get enough press coverage for people to say to the hospitals, wait a minute, what's going on? Yes, that will help, and certainly, you know, in Scottsburg, Indiana, one of the ways we got that plant stopped was, you know, a number of meetings and a couple of very active physicians there. We spent a lot of time with, got people in the medical world agitated enough that they were basically the biggest force to get that plant stopped. But it's not as easy as, unfortunately, one might think in that regard with the physicians. But part of it is, again, it's new. Most physicians, even pulmonologists, don't know very much about small level particulate pollution. And most of them assume, because they haven't done the due diligence, that because the National Ambient Air Quality Standard says X, that EPA must have researched this up the gazoo. Well, they have, but they don't want to make stricter standards because the industry and the political pressure is going to be horrendous. And the little chart that I showed you and Duff refers to, I mean, again, part of what got me interested in doing this and spending as much time and energy as I do is that I took that chart in August of '09 to EPA. And I said, we're interested in this because you say this is clean energy. Well, here are the air permit numbers, and it looks to me like it's a hell of a lot dirtier. And guess what? They had never, ever looked at a comparison of stack emissions. Everybody just assumed, because we did it all the time, burning wood was going to be cleaner. Because the trees will grow back, it'll be carbon neutral, it'll be okay. Well, guess what? I mean, this is why you go after data, and this is why science is important. The current Republican candidates, putative candidates for president notwithstanding, it's not a matter of what I believe. This isn't about what I believe or they believe. This is about looking at the data, and we do have the data. The data's there. Yep. If you can get them to jump, please do. I mean, I agree with you that there are economics involved with this. More of the economic stabilization issue is around wood use in Europe, and now Europe is beginning to back away from that. They've been using it much more heavily in the last 5 years than we have. Again, when you hear about energy security, the energy security argument can really only be made in reference to biofuels. So producing stuff that cars, trucks, jet engines can burn. Nobody, with the exception of 2 plants, I think, left in the country, nobody burns oil to produce commercial scale electricity. So again, this plant's a little unusual here because it's basically heat. Everything else in the 250 across the country is to produce electricity, a fewer combined so-called heat and power, most electricity. That is not an issue of energy independence because nobody imports oil. It's too expensive to make electrical power. So it is, there are issues there, but a lot of this is just about people. I mean, I tell you another way this gets twisted. Okay? It took a long time for environmentalists to get the political establishment of both parties in Washington to understand that there was a reason to look at developing more renewable energy. Unfortunately, because they didn't look closely, burning wood got dumped in with solar and wind and geothermal, et cetera. Now, when you think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Those other things are truly renewable or inexhaustible or whatever. Wood is not, quote, renewable. Okay? But what's happened now is that for all kinds of political reasons, people have set this arbitrary target of 17 or 20% or whatever renewable energy in the country by 2020. So I can't tell you, I could, but I'm not going to, how many, and specifically who, offices I spent an hour, hour and a half in, which is nice. They'll talk and they'll listen in Washington, D.C., and you get to this end point where you say, okay, you understand it's dirtier, you understand the health costs, you understand the environmental costs, you understand the economics, yep. You understand that we're currently subsidizing this with billions of dollars that shouldn't be spent because we're not buying clean and green power. And they're giving you this funny look and they're kind of squirming around. And so you ask the obvious question. Clearly, you're not ready to take a stand. You're not ready to either help us push this particular piece of legislation or sponsor a briefing or whatever else. And many times the answer has come back in so many words, well, we get it, but basically what you're asking us to do is pull biomass combustion out of the renewable energy portfolio system and remove the financial, yeah. And then there's a big pause and lots of nervous looking and no eye contact. They say, but we won't meet the target. And you go, huh? They say, well, we won't meet 20%. You go, I go, because I'm not too tactful in these situations. You got to be kidding me. You're about to spend billions of dollars, half of that renewable energy power, because literally it's going to be about 12% of it, so 20%, so more than half of the 20% or 12% of the total is going to be from burning wood or municipal trash. And it's a sham, and they know it. They sat there, they listened to it, they tell you that. But for political reasons, they don't want to say, we're going to have to revise the renewable portfolio standards. We're going to have to revise the targets. They'd rather tell you in 2020, we really did it. But in this case, if we burn all this wood, 50 gigawatts, those 250 plants, and I've had these numbers validated by EIA, if we get other reductions because of efficiency and everything, so you took like the Kerry-Boxer bill, and you looked at their projected total emissions for the country, I'm not talking power, I'm talking total emissions for the country in 2020, and we let these 250 plants be built as they're projected to be built, those 250 plants will be 14% of the total CO2 emissions in the country. Total. That's how dirty this stuff is. So, but politicians want to meet the target. So believe me, when you go to DC, it'll drive you nuts in a hurry. So. Anything else? Yep. Well, okay, I don't know enough about the local politics here, but again, to me, it's more a question of saying, trying to get people to understand there is a fact issue. It's not a belief issue. It's not an argument issue. And seeing whether we can't get to some people, and again, Delta Airlines loves me. I'll come back here. And if we can get to talk to them, fine. But we got to get in to be able to talk to them and say, you know, look, you can push them to keep a cleaner source of power here and continue to get your heat. And in fact, ultimately, at least for the projections for the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to cost the hospital a lot less money to get natural gas-fired heat than it's going to cost them to get biomass-fired. Yes, sir. Urban waste wood. Now, how long that's going to hold up and what it's going to be, and they're going to try and tell you it's tree limbs and things they're cutting down and take off of power lines and everything else. Whether that's really enough, maybe while they're still only putting out the equivalent of about 5 or 6 megawatts of power, and maybe they will. But they're also going to have contaminated wood in it. That in terms of other emissions, volatile organic chemicals, furans, dioxins, et cetera, immediately spikes that number way up, makes it more dangerous. So, and if Duff is right, and they're actually looking to ramp this up, and then we have some numbers where they've said they're projecting to burn 5, 6, 7 times more volume of wood in terms of, you know, tons of wood than they're burning this year. I don't believe they can get it, but I don't pretend to say I've got a definitive study about that. But that's always a question. So, well, that's fine with me. We'll try and provide you. Duff knows a lot about this. We've been working together for a couple of years now. We'd be happy to try and provide you whatever information you think will serve as sufficient leverage with the local politicians. I never make any predictions about what politicians will do. So it's a good idea. I'm not trying to I don't know. I mean, most of the time it's come down to people getting sufficiently agitated to say, this won't work. And politically, it's going to be too costly for these people. Well, we have a lot of video clip stuff. There are people who've been working on this. I don't pretend to be one of the people who's primarily pushing in that. I have no objection at all to somebody doing that. But don't let it detract from the fact that in order to stop this now, it's stoppable. It takes a while to put together the video and all this stuff. And the point is, right now, people have to stay focused on getting to meetings, getting this petition signed, getting a lot of names in front of the city council people and saying, we don't buy this act. Somebody's going to have to give us a lot better answers. In the meantime, by all means, we'll try and help you whatever way we can. If anybody can get together a convincing video, there are video segment stuff out there. I can't tell you I know any particular one that I think is better than another one, but they're there. And we'll be happy to try and get you some links to that stuff too. Yep. Well, it's rare that you have a heat generator, so there are not many places in the country that are left with this kind of steam infrastructure. So yet that piece is unusual. There are not many plants burning biomass that are situated in urban or heavy suburban areas. Part of that's to reduce the transportation cost of moving the fuel. Part of it's because they don't want to engender the political resistance. So you want to look at, you got Shelton, Washington, where we stopped one, not Gretna, Florida, rural town, okay. Port St. Joe, another very small rural town. A couple of places in North Carolina, very small rural towns. Scottsburg, in Indiana, I'm blanking on the other place in Indiana at the moment. They're small towns. Rothschild, Wisconsin, small town. So yeah, they don't tend to be in heavy areas because in part, you have too much chance to get too many people together saying, wait a minute, this is a bad deal. So. Well, again, it is vulnerable, but the enigma, the thing is just totally puzzling is, whichever way you want to look at the environment, the health costs, anything, is you've got natural gas sitting there. Why change it? I mean, there is no defensible argument. I don't care which way, which layer you want to look at. It's not greener. It's not better for the environment. It's going to produce additional health burdens, health costs, et cetera. It's more costly to run. I mean, there's no rationale to do this. So get them to give you a rationale. Make the mayor give you a rationale beyond a lot of hot air, because that's what it is. So. Well, no, Virginia Mason could play a very big role. There have been a couple of places where a particular institution, like I got asked almost 2 years ago to come into Missouri to talk against a plant there by the forest industry people, because they don't have a lot of big roundwood there, but they do have a lot of either sawdust finishing work or charcoal. So the forestry industry people, back to the gentleman who asked the question here about is there enough wood, they immediately looked at this 2 years ago and said, wait a minute, we're not going to be able to make the charcoal, we're not going to be able to do these other things like the big industry there making wine casks, because they have a fair amount of old oak. And so they're sitting there going, and I don't know the name of the gentleman in back, but a lot of this starts out as waste wood. And then Duke Power in North Carolina is a perfect example of this, that 2.5 years ago, we got involved with them. They sat there with regulators and said, absolutely waste wood. I've got the transcripts of the hearings, et cetera. Well, this year now, 3 different times, Duke Power has gone to the regulators in North Carolina to get permission to burn increasing numbers of whole trees. Now, you can maybe stretch it around and use waste wood and argue about the carbon neutrality piece and this and that and the other thing. When you start burning whole trees, argument's totally over. It's not worth anybody's hot air. It's wrong. And so wood supply, even in this state, could turn out to be a problem, not so much for Seattle Steam, it's not a big enough entity. But when you factor in whatever we got now, 7, how many of these other little babies that we got cooking in this? 7. That's going to be a lot of pollution and a lot of wood going down the drain. So it's an issue. Again, if you need a reference, whatever, don't hesitate to email me, and I thank you very much for taking the time to come and adding some other insight.
I'd like to add that talking to group, but we need people. We need we're already those of us who are working this right now are already stretched, and so more hands on deck, and we can get out and talk to McDermott. We can talk to the hospitals, but we need to just get down and do it.
I'd like to second that. We need people. We've beaten 2 of these things. In each case, Dr. Sammons came out and inspired the people to uproar. Being polite didn't stop the incinerators in Mason County, 65 megawatt, by a huge transnational corporation. We stopped it there because the entire county was in uproar and in opposition to this. It was a massive grassroots effort. 10% of the people, the registered voters in Mason County, signed our petition opposing biomass. 10% were registered voters. In Thurston County, Bill came just a year ago and spoke to the political leaders in Thurston County. By December, because of community uproar, the 3 Thurston County commissioners imposed a 12-month moratorium. So we stopped the incinerator plant for Evergreen State College. So we can beat this, but it takes people power. We need each of you to go out and recruit your friends and your neighbors. If you breathe air, you're at risk. Please join us.